I'm your host, Mr. MegaManFan. These are the Retro Hunting Adventures, and this is a boxed copy of Juno First. There is no one left, no reinforcements, just you and a handful of reserve ships. Enemy forces are threatening the Juno colony, Earth's last defense post. You must fend off wave after wave of enemy ships, skimming dangerously above the planet's force field. How long can you hold them off? You must persevere. Whoever controls Earth must take Juno first. This is the final war, the last battle, transcending time and space. The outcome determines the fate of our Earth. Juno First is an Atari 2600 version of the 1983 Konami arcade game, or so say at the Atari age, but I'm one of those unfortunate souls who never saw this in an arcade. All I saw was Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Ms. Pac-Man, Galaga, Space Invaders, Defender, that kind of stuff. Perhaps if you lived on the East or West Coast, maybe you remember this being in an arcade. Or perhaps if you grew up in someplace like Australia, like my friend Ryan Taylor, maybe this was in arcades there. But where I grew up in the humble Midwest, this was not an arcade game I ever saw. And in fact, this was not a game I even knew about. This is my first time with Juno First, and I bought it complete in box because I wanted the experience of unboxing a game for Atari 2600, which was something I never got to do as a kid because I did not own an Atari back then. Only played them when I had a chance to at a friend's house or at the Sears store because they had a Sears video arcade on display, usually with Pac-Man in it. So for me, unboxing Atari games has always been a treat. And since for $15 more you could get a complete in-box copy from Atari Age, I decided to take them up on the offer. But if you want just the cartridge, it's $25 loose. Not endorsed by Atari Age, not sponsored by them in any way. I paid for this myself. But the reputation this game had preceded it. It was highly recommended, and I did not despair of spending $40 for a quality Atari 2600 homebrew that is largely reputed to be a faithful arcade conversion, even though I've never played said arcade game. But it seemed to me that something about this would instantly appeal to me watching the demo videos of it and reading reviews of it. I thought, this is a game I will like. It seems like it plays to the strengths of the Atari 2600 system. A wise guy from another channel once said that every Atari game had the word star or space in the description. I think you know which wise guy I'm talking about. You subscribe to him and so do I. But the point is, he's not wrong because black backgrounds are something that's very easy for the Atari 2600/video computer system to render with its very low amount of processing power, the limited amount of time you have to process graphics on each scan line, and of course the small cartridge sizes, often 4K, but later more was possible thanks to bank switching and even in certain cases extra chips, such as Pitfall 2, expanded the possibilities. But this is not the game we are here to feature today. This is just the one that I happened to have in while my Commodore 1702 monitor was warming up because I had to rebuild this entire setup after moving furniture in and out of my rec room. So this was the test case to make sure all my equipment was functioning properly. And this is my preferred way to play Atari 2600 games. Emulation is fine, emulation is great. Retron systems, also great. Handhelds? Great too. Any way that you can experience Atari games, please do that, especially if you're a fan of modern games. Go back and see where gaming came from, and then delve into the homebrew scene with games like this to see things that no one believed was possible back then as the Atari is taken to its limits. But instead of just telling you that these kind of games can push the boundaries, let me actually show you. We'll skip ahead to some footage of Juno First. If I was to make a minor quibble, and this would only be a minor one, this cartridge was a very tight fit in my 2600 And usually, I only have problems with carts fitting into my 7800, but for some reason, when this shell was assembled, it was a tight fit. Albert, I'm looking at you, brother. But then again, I've been there. I've sat with him at a convention assembling hundreds of Atari 2600 homebrew games, so I know it's a laborious process, and I am not begrudging him that, because taking the time to make a game for all of us to enjoy who still appreciate vintage Atari systems is a labor of love. I wouldn't say he does it for huge profit. He does it to keep this console alive for those of us who are still playing Atari games in the year 2020. And that is quite an amazing thought when you consider that this system has been around since 1977. So to be playing new games on an Atari 2600 means you are experiencing games on a 40-plus-year-old console in modern times. And these are fun games too. Juno First relies a lot on this scrolling playfield where you can move forward and back. You are speeding up or slowing down and going in reverse, either way. And you have to shift from left to right to get these enemies that are coming gradually towards you. And if you speed up, they grow larger in your sights. And if you back up, they shrink away. So perspective was done really well here. And the illusion of movement, thanks to the lines on the playfield, is really excellent. It looks like you're going toward the horizon or backing away from it, or as the game's manual and accompanying text on Atari describes it, the energy field that you are flying over. Nice little mental image there to absorb you into the game, which is important when you're dealing with the limited technology that was available in the late 70s and early 80s with home console games. You had to have some degree of imagination to envelop yourself in the experience and make it feel like you're transported into the game that you're playing. And that's one of the other reasons that I really enjoy playing this on authentic hardware with a joystick in a rec room on a monitor, because that brings out that feeling that you had, that old school feeling of playing Atari games when you were young. And if that wasn't your experience, then I apologize for being nostalgic for something that you didn't ever get to experience, and that even I only had somewhat limited experience with myself. But there is really something awesome about the feeling of a flickering monitor in a darkened room with a joystick in your hand, mashing the firing button, and hearing and seeing the explosions on the screen as you're taking out one enemy after another. It's an adrenaline rush. It's a visceral thrill. It's a feeling that no matter how polished and 3D and high resolution and 4K modern video games have become, and I'm not knocking them because I have a PS4, I have an Xbox One. I'm not saying those are bad things. I'm just saying that there's something enthralling about a lack of reality, the unreality of early video games. It probably sounds counterintuitive to say less real equals more immersive, but then if I put it this way, perhaps it makes more sense. What's realistic about Super Mario Brothers? A plumber who eats mushrooms and stomps on Koopa Troopas? That's not realistic. What's realistic about a blue hedgehog who can run faster than the speed of sound and destroy enemies by crashing into them? Sonic the Hedgehog isn't realistic. Why do we value realism so highly? Why is looking and feeling like real life considered to be so important to video games now? I would argue that reality has never been important to a video game, only elements of reality set in a fantastical world. Nothing about Doom or Duke Nukem is real. Maybe you can really fire a gun at things in real life, but you're not shooting space aliens with them, so that's where it goes too far, in my opinion, when people complain about things that are blocky and pixelated and aren't realistic, because there's nothing realistic about any first-person shooter. Even if you play something like Call of Duty Modern Warfare, I'm pretty sure that real war is nothing like what a video game is. Not that I ever want to experience that, and you don't either, but I'm just saying video games are not life simulators nor vice versa. So, Juno First can be judged entirely on its value as a fun, addictive arcade experience that begs you to get good and get better at shooting down these enemies and avoiding their enemy fire, particularly in the later waves, as the fire seems to track you across the screen. You try to move to avoid it, and it homes in on you, so you have to speed up or slow down. You have to make a tactical decision to either avoid it or charge toward it, and in the process, you might miss picking up an enemy astronaut or run directly into an enemy ship as you're trying to avoid the fire of another enemy ship. But if one got behind you and you hit the brakes and go in reverse, you can back into it too. So there's some critical thinking that you need to do as you're playing this game, which is only further complicated by the fact that you have a small amount of fuel to complete each wave, which is essentially acting as your time limit. When you run out of fuel, your ship is dead. So you've got to clear the wave as fast as you can without getting hit before you run out of time. There's a lot to juggle here. And like any good Atari 2600 game that demands replay after you've played it the first time, it gets you to work on multiple things that keep you engaged. Pitfall 2, I think, is a fair example of that, because you have to collect the gold, you have to collect the special items, and you have to avoid the enemies. So you're working on multiple things and trying to remember how to get to each one and where they all are over a sprawling map that is multiple screens horizontally and vertically, creating a huge play field for you to navigate through. So, what's in a game? It's the way you play it, it's how it's made, it's what it sounds like, it's the way it feels when you sit down in front of it with whatever controller you have. These are all elements that make up a great game, and I would say Juno First not only lived up to that, but exceeded my expectations when I sat down with it and unboxed it and put it in my 2600. I wish I had seen this game in the arcade back in the day. I'm sure I would have plunked many quarters into it, and I can't imagine that this isn't a faithful recreation of it, or if we must be fair, the most faithful recreation that an Atari 2600 is capable of. Because if you don't expect the world, sometimes you still get more than the world anyway, because programmers have become so adept at tricking this minuscule, tiny power console into doing much bigger things that it is truly a credit to the programmers and the designers, who deserve special mention right here and now as we near the end of this video. So, giving credit where it's due, the label and manual artwork is by Dave Dries, the game graphics and manual are by Nathan Strum, the title music is by Eric Ellring, and the Atari Vox speech, if you have that, is by Glenn Saunders. The author is Chris Walton. So, a big salute to all of you for making an Atari game that's just as fun to play in the year 2020 as it would have been in the 70s or the 80s. This one is unique because Infidelity ported Mega Man 4 from NES to Super Nintendo. This can run natively on any Super Nintendo or Super Nintendo clone. SNES, Super Famicom, Analog Super NT, and so on. You can even play it in an emulator if you like. Just fire up SNES 9X or whichever one you prefer, but that's what I generally use if I'm doing it on PC. If I'm doing it on Mac, it's OpenEMU. That's not the point. The point is, Infidelity had to painstakingly convert every one of the operation codes in this game from NES to SNES registers. I don't think you can quite grasp it unless I say this port took him 6 months and multiple revisions to pull off. So when you've seen other Super Nintendo NES hacks before, getting NES games running on Super Nintendo, they often have glitchy, buggy graphics or no sound or any combination of the two because somebody just straight ported it without trying to correct for the differences between the NES and the Super NES. Infidelity actually did that. He painstakingly fixed every single one of those different operation codes that's not the same because the chipsets are different, the registers are different, the execution of the code is different. This is no small feat. That's why this qualifies for Homebrew review. And it's not like the first time we've looked at a port from one system to another on a Homebrew review. Usually we're doing things like looking at arcade games being ported to Atari 2600 long after the lifespan of the Atari system, but in this case, it's still long after the lifespan of both the NES and the Super NES, and the audacity to port an NES game to Super Nintendo just to prove it could be done deserves a huge thumbs up in my eyes, especially for picking what I consider to be one of the most underrated games in the entire Mega Man franchise. 4 is great just for the introduction of the powered up Mega Buster. Getting to fire a charge shot has become canon now in Mega Man games from 1 through 10 and on, but it wasn't until Mega Man 4. This was the first time you could hold down your button to power up a charge shot and then release it when it was fully charged. You'll notice that I started with Toadman here, and that's my preferred order of bosses on Mega Man 4, because you can beat Toadman without any of the other weapons by consistently firing the Mega Cannon, just non-stop barrage of fire, and Toadman will never do the rain flush on you. As long as you keep firing at him, he can't do his special attack. And once you beat him, you can use the rain flush to beat Brightman, because he's vulnerable to it. And so on and so forth and so on and so forth. If you want a strategy guide for boss orders for any of the Mega Man games, Rockman games, and you're new to the franchise as a whole, I always recommend mmhp.net. Just click on the name of the game that you need the reference for, and then click on the link that says suggested order, and you get a full list. You can obviously play Mega Man Rockman games in any order that you like, but usually the guide on mmhp.net is 99 out of 100 times is the order I would choose to play the bosses in myself. So I tend to agree with the listings on that website, which is why I recommend it. Why is Gary trying to hurt me here? No, Gary, be a good snail. Don't try to kill me. Well, it's kill or be killed in the world of Rockman. You either get the snail or the snail gets you. But it still makes me a little sad to kill Gary, and then I have to kill him again. Oh, there's no justice in this world. It's a cruel, cruel world. Anyway, if you're looking for this port to play on your own Super Nintendo or SNES clone of choice, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is the publicity for this port has absolutely blown up this week, thanks in no small part to an article and video by Bob from Retro RGB. And big shout out to him, by the way. He just moved out of his New York apartment into a new home and still managed to do his regular weekly video despite the move. That's impressive, Bob, so thumbs up to you. But the bad news is that publicity caused the original MediaFire link for the Super Nintendo port of Mega Man 4 to be taken down. I guess they either didn't like the amount of traffic that download was generating, or somebody hit them with a DMCA. I don't know the particulars in this case. I choose not to speculate too much because Capcom doesn't normally go after fan games, and I would consider this to be a fan game. It's a loving port of Mega Man 4 to a system that it was never on before. That's not normally the kind of thing they throw shade at. They're not like Nintendo going after Mario bootlegs, Mario hacks, Mario ROMs. They're not generally that litigious. So I'm going to assume it was just a significant amount of traffic in a very short amount of time, and MediaFire said no to that, no thank you, and they just opted out of it completely. But But, the internet always finds a way. And what I will say to you, just as a general rule of advice, is don't use Google to search for these kind of things. Go to duckduckgo.com. That should be your standard search engine browser application anyway. Just if you want to search for things, it's generally better than Google because things don't get delisted and they don't track your browser history. So you've got some significant advantages to DuckDuckGo over Google. I'm not saying never use Google because obviously YouTube is part of Google and that would be bad if I was dissing the algorithm, but at the same time, if you want to find ROMs like this one, Google is not always going to be your first or best option. And I think there's no shame in playing this because it is a homebrew game. It's not like this is going to hurt sales of Mega Man 4 on any compilation because people are still going to want to play the original NES game in its original format in whatever emulators they bundle in with the Mega Man Legacy Collection or any of the other collections that Mega Man 4 has appeared on. So this is not harming Capcom. In fact, if anything, it's helping them by promoting Mega Man 4 to a whole new audience who probably, if they didn't know about it, were exposed to it by reading about this port from NES to Super Nintendo, and if they did know about it, were excited to play it again, just like I was, just to see how faithful it was and whether or not there were any glitches. And from this Toadman fight, I can report to you right now, it's playing exactly the same way it would on authentic NES hardware. This boss fight is going exactly the way I expected it to, and down goes Toadman. So big thumbs up to Infidelity for the time and the effort that it went to go into homebrewing this from NES to Super Nintendo. I don't think this is the final version unless he gets a real DMCA and Capcom tells him to knock it off with a cease and desist letter, but I strongly suspect they won't do that. I don't know that for a fact. Capcom loves fan games. They are generally not anti-homebrew, anti-fan games. They haven't taken down Mega Man Maker. I really don't think they're going after Infidelity for this. I'm Mr. Mega Man Fan. This has been Homebrew Review. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment on the video. All those things help. Any kind of engagement is great for the channel. And I'll see you all next week with another new game. Hey, it's Steve actually, aka Mr. Mega Man Fan, but you've definitely got the right dude if you want me to take a look at it for Homebrew Review. I'll make a video and probably have it scheduled by next Wednesday. If you want to send me any high-resolution artwork assets for transitions to and from gameplay footage, you can attach those here. And he replied, I totally apologize about that, Steve. I'm thrilled you are willing to look at it. It's very much a passion project I've been working on for over a year now. I'm very excited the Kickstarter I launched last week managed to blow past my initial goal. And from there, I'll just leave the rest of the email out of it, but I think we've established that my name is not John, but his name is Dave, and he's from Cyberlink Promotions. So, Dave, big shout out to you, and big shout out to your homebrew game, and for meeting your Kickstarter stretch goal. Congratulations on that as well. I will include a link to the Kickstarter in the description below if you would like to check it out. There are still 32 days left to go as of Wednesday, and it's already fully funded, so you don't necessarily have to back it. It's going to get made either way, but if you like what you see here, that would be how to get a physical or a digital copy. And the good news is they've got some partners that they're working with that make that physical copy very much a reality. This is not a pie-in-the-sky dream. They have already contracted a studio that will be able to print and physically produce it, and they have experience in the genre of making homebrew NES games. They previously released a game in 2017 called Twin Dragons. The name Broke Studio may sound anti-confidence inspiring. If they're broke, how are they going to print an NES game? But they've done it before, so I think that's reasonably assured, for lack of a better word. Assured that you would get a physical copy in 2022 if you back it. And I would say that you could also be assured because this is a working gameplay demo. It's not something that they were like, back it and then we'll start making the game. No, Dave had a game already before he even put up the Kickstarter, and I think that's a sign of confidence when you're looking at a homebrew game, is when you start out with a working product and then you just want the extra funds to finish it, tweak it, print up physical editions of it, instead of making people back a pie-in-the-sky dream of something you want to do that may not actually happen. The best Kickstarters usually have something to show for them, especially the homebrew games, so I tip my hat to Dave on that one as well. And last but not least, I have to mention, this is based on a webcomic that he worked on a decade ago. Now, you don't need to have read the webcomic to be able to play this game, but I have to admit there was some backstory that is referenced in the game in these dialogue excerpts that I clearly don't know. They are talking about past history with each other, people not trusting each other, goofy people doing goofy things like brewing a bunch of beer and then drinking it all, or buying a tractor and keeping it in a cave, even though a tractor would be kind of useless in a cave. I mean, there's a lot of comedy that is tied to this webcomic that perhaps is funnier if you've read that webcomic. It's still amusing because it's a lot of non sequitur randomness that just tickles my funny bone, but at the same time, there's definitely a backstory that goes beyond this. And the fact that they're printing up a physical edition that'll come with a comic and a manual and a box, you'll get more information about all of those things in that. But you can also go to the Kickstarter, and he talks about the history of the webcomic. So this brings me back to something he said in the email. This video game, The Adventures of Panzer, he called it a passion project. And I definitely feel that when I'm playing this one for Homebrew Review. You can tell that this was something he took very seriously at a previous point in his life, and he and the original creators of his webcomic had moved on to different endeavors, but that spirit of it still lived with him. And when he discovered that NES Maker existed and he could take those characters that they created and resurrect them in the form of an 8-bit video game, that passion was reignited. And I love passion when you're programming a homebrew game, because you don't want to just make another clone of an already established title. You want to do something original and that is filled with your excitement to deliver it to the world. That doesn't always result in a good game, mind you, but at least it results in an original game. Although, I say that, and I mean this as both a compliment and perhaps a comment on NES Maker. I've not used NES Maker myself, so maybe this is a limitation of it, but it ends up feeling a little bit like Cave Story. That's not bad. I don't mind that it feels a little bit like Cave Story. The way the art is displayed, the tile scrolling, the size of the sprites. I don't know if that's just the way NES Maker is, or whether that was a design choice on Dave's part. I'm sure he may send me an email and tell me it was one or both, and I look forward to hearing back from him on that. But I would say that The Adventures of Panzer shows a lot of promise. If this is already a working demo at this point, imagine what the finished game could actually be. If I was going to make a few suggestions, though, the first thing I would say is maybe put a few more checkpoints in the game, because there were some cheap deaths that I experienced that caused me to have to replay long sections of a level. And if I was using save states, that wouldn't have been a problem, but I felt like to give you the authentic gameplay experience, I should play it as though I was playing it on an actual NES console. Even though I recorded the footage through an emulator, I wanted to presume that I didn't have an N8 EverDrive in the NES cart slot or any other kind of device which would allow me to save progress at any point during the game. So I just played it straight up like it was the physical print edition they plan to release in 2022. And if that's the case, I would definitely put more checkpoints in there, because grinding your way through a long section over and over again is a little bit much. And it makes it better or worse that there's a one-up every time I replayed that same section. So it's not like I would get a game over. I would just pick up that extra life and have to do it all again. Which makes me think he knew it was obsessively long and that he put that one-up in there on purpose, knowing that people would have to do it multiple times in order to make progress. And also, I suppose it's got tongue-tied there, sorry. It's me being a little bit of a grump by saying I had to replay it multiple times, because the challenge made it worth replaying multiple times. It shouldn't be too easy or too hard. I think it tends to be, well, not overly one or the other. It seems to strike the right balance, which is always a tricky thing to do, especially when you're designing a game for people other than yourself to play. Something that might be easy for you might be incredibly hard for someone else, and vice versa. You never know when you're making a game. You have to take your best guess. So I would also suggest to Dave, this is not something he has to do, just a suggestion, that maybe you could adjust a difficulty level, make it easier or harder depending on the person playing. But that could be too much programming to do, and I don't know how flexible NES Maker is with that. But if there was like easy, medium, and hard, maybe that would be a good accessibility option for players. And I suppose in the final version, there will be a little bit of history in the game, so that the webcomic is not such a primary source for figuring out what's going on. I mean, there are some cutscenes at the beginning of the game that give us a little bit of the background, but maybe, this is again just a suggestion, maybe there would be a way to reference the webcomic from 10 years ago and not just the events of the present day that are 10 years later. Like, give us a little more of the background of these characters. We do know this much. Panzer is an arrogant buffoon, and he thinks he's a great military leader, but he's really not. And the people who serve under him suffer this fool out of loyalty or obedience, but they all think, well, we just have to put up with it because that's our lot in life. They're a little bit downtrodden, but they stalwartly manage to carry on despite it. And that's what I've done with this homebrew review. I've carried on to the end to show you all that it has to offer. I think it's a good game, and I'm glad the Kickstarter achieved the funding goal, and I look forward to seeing a physical version. Thanks, Dave, and thanks to all of you for watching. Actually, before I show you the gameplay footage, let me just show you the contents. We've got this very bright colored cartridge, almost a cross between purple and pink. Everybody sees colors differently, so somebody's gonna disagree with me on that. And a full instruction manual, and a sleeve that looks like the old NES cart sleeves, but it says limited run. And of course, the box itself without the shrink wrap on it. Now let's move on to some gameplay footage.